I'm a 28-year-old guy, and I've got 3 siblings. My younger brother Jack is 25 and recently got engaged. In total, there are 4 of us: our older sister who's 30, then me, Jack, and our youngest brother who's 22. Our parents are pretty involved in all of our lives, so it didn't really shock me when they wanted to have a talk about Jack's upcoming wedding. What did catch me off guard was what they expected from us. Just recently, my parents gathered all of us together and shared that Jack and his fiancée are planning a big wedding next year, way bigger than what they can afford. But instead of telling them to maybe cut back and be realistic, my parents told us that we, the siblings, should all pitch in financially to help cover the cost. They tried to sell it as family supports family and said Jack deserves to have the wedding of his dreams. But it didn't feel like a suggestion, it felt more like they were handing out assignments, and most of it was directed at me. They brought up the fact that I've got a steady job now and no kids, so I could do more. While they told my older sister and youngest brother to contribute whatever they could, the vibe was crystal clear: they were counting on me to fork over the biggest chunk. I was honestly stunned. It felt less like volunteering and more like being drafted into paying for someone else's party. At first, I thought maybe I misunderstood. So I said, probably a bit too directly, that if Jack couldn't afford the wedding he wanted, then he should plan something within his means. That definitely didn't go over well. My parents immediately jumped in, saying I was being cold and selfish. My dad said, "Jack's always been there for you. It's your turn to be there for him." My mom followed that up by saying this is what family is supposed to do during big milestones. She even claimed that if the roles were reversed, they'd do the same for me, which I honestly doubt, considering how often there are double standards in this family. They kept repeating, "You make good money. You'll figure it out. This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing for your brother." I tried to explain that while I do have a decent job, I've still got financial obligations. I'm paying off student loans, carrying some credit card debt, and I handle all my living expenses, rent, bills, groceries, by myself. It's not like I've got a pile of extra cash just lying around. But they brushed it off and insisted that since I'm doing better than my siblings, I should make the sacrifice. Here's some background: Jack has always been the golden child. He's still living at home, rent-free, with my parents covering a bunch of his expenses. He's always gotten help financially. For example, when he needed a car, they bought him a nearly new one. Meanwhile, I had to take out a loan just to get a used car. And I was expected to be self-sufficient right after college. I didn't say all that out loud during the conversation, but it was definitely running through my head as they kept pushing. My sister said she and her husband might be able to chip in around $200. My youngest brother, who's still in college and broke, didn't say much and just kind of kept his head down. It was obvious neither of them could offer much, which only added to the pressure being put on me. In the end, I told my parents respectfully I thought that I wasn't going to pay for Jack's wedding. I said, I love him and I'm happy for him, but this isn't my financial responsibility. If he can't afford the wedding he wants, then he needs to scale it back. I also made it clear that going into debt or messing up my own finances to fund someone else's party isn't an option. They didn't take that well at all. My mom started crying and told me she was disappointed. My dad called me selfish and said I wasn't acting like a good brother. He even hit me with the classic guilt trip, "After everything we've done for you," which felt super unfair, considering I've been financially on my own for years. We ended the talk without any real resolution. They told me to think it over and implied I was letting everyone down. I walked out feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. But the thing is, this isn't some emergency, it's not about health or safety. It's just a fancy party. And in my opinion, if you can't afford a lavish wedding, then maybe you shouldn't plan one in the first place. Jack hasn't said anything to me directly, but I'm sure he knows I said no. I'm guessing he's not thrilled. I've talked to a few friends about it, and they all think the situation is nuts. One of my best friends actually laughed when I told him he thought I was joking. Another buddy thought I made the whole thing up because it sounded so ridiculous. So now I'm wondering, am I really the bad guy for refusing to bankroll my brother's over-the-top wedding? Update number 1. First off, thanks to everyone who responded to my original post. To quickly summarize, I'm the 28-year-old who refused to help pay for my 25-year-old brother's dream wedding after our parents decided all the siblings should chip in. I've got loans, bills, and a budget I stick to, so I said no, which led to a blow-up with my parents. Most people told me I wasn't in the wrong, which honestly helped me feel more solid in my decision. It's been about a week since all that went down, and things have only gotten more frustrating. I recently found out that Jack and his fiancée are planning a wedding that's going to cost around $30,000. Yep, 40 grand for one single day. And here's the kicker, they both still live at home with my parents and don't pay rent. I found out about the $30,000 when I stopped by my parents' place a few days ago. Jack and his fiancée were chatting with my mom, all excited about venues and vendors. I overheard her say something like, "It's going to be around $30,000 total, but it's everything we've ever wanted." I couldn't believe it. In our family, that kind of wedding is completely unheard of. My parents aren't rich by any stretch, and Jack definitely doesn't have that kind of money saved. Which is wild, considering he doesn't pay rent and still somehow doesn't have any real savings. I quietly pulled my mom aside and asked if the wedding was seriously going to cost $30,000. She just gave a tired sigh and said, "Weddings are expensive. That's what they really want." I asked how they planned to come up with that much money. She said she and my dad would help where they could, but they couldn't cover the whole thing, and that's why they expect us siblings to step in. Apparently, Jack's fiancée's family can't contribute much either, which is another reason they're leaning so heavily on us. I told her, even if we all pitched in, it's not like we're pulling money out of thin air. But she didn't give me a clear answer on how much they're expecting from each of us. She just said, "Every little bit helps." The vagueness made me suspicious that they've already got a number in mind for me, and it's probably not small. What also bothers me is how little Jack and his fiancée are doing to save. They live rent-free, so you'd think they'd be stockpiling cash. When I casually asked Jack how the savings were going, he just shrugged and said, "We're putting aside what we can, but everything is so expensive lately." That rubbed me the wrong way. From where I'm standing, they've had every opportunity to save and just haven't prioritized it. Not long ago, Jack went out and bought himself a brand new truck, and he gave his fiancée a really expensive engagement ring. I mean, those were their personal choices, sure, but it's hard not to see it as reckless to spend big like that while expecting the rest of us to fund their wedding. I vented to our older sister, Hannah, and she was just as shocked as I was when I told her about the $40,000 price tag. She told me that when our parents first brought up the idea of the siblings chipping in, she only agreed to give a small amount. She and her husband are already stretched thin with 2 kids and a mortgage, so they told our parents they could maybe throw in a couple $100, tops. Hannah actually apologized to me for even agreeing to contribute anything at all, because now she feels like our parents used her tiny offer as leverage to guilt me into giving more. She also reminded me that when she got married a few years back, she and her husband paid for almost everything themselves. She never even considered asking me or our youngest brother to help financially. Our youngest brother later admitted to me that during that meeting, he felt completely cornered and guilty. So he muttered something vague about maybe being able to contribute. But realistically, he's still in college and totally broke. He later thanked me for standing my ground because he didn't have the nerve to say no out loud. At this point, it's obvious to me that my parents' entire strategy is to gather a small amount from my siblings, lean heavily on me for the bulk of it, and then add in whatever they can themselves to cover the cost. In their eyes, I'm the one who's supposed to take care of most of it because I have a stable income and no dependents. That realization really stung. It made me feel like I'm being taken advantage of, just because I've worked hard to get myself financially stable. We haven't had another big family sit-down since I learned all this, but I did bring it up with my mom during a shorter one-on-one conversation. She repeated her usual line about every little bit helps, but I was firm and told her my answer hasn't changed. I said I'm not going to put myself into debt or sacrifice my own financial future just so Jack can have a luxury wedding. She shot me this cold, disappointed look and said she expected more from me. That hit hard, but I didn't change my stance. I still believe I'm doing the right thing. Honestly, knowing all this new information only makes me more confident that saying no is the smart move. A $30,000 wedding while living rent-free? That's just ridiculous. So, that's where things stood until Update 2. Update 2. About a week later, the inevitable showdown with Jack finally happened, and it was brutal. He basically accused me of being selfish and said I cared more about money than my own family. It escalated so quickly that he ended up telling me he didn't even want me at the wedding if I wasn't going to chip in. This happened a few days ago when I went over to my parents' house for dinner. I still visit sometimes to try and keep the peace. Jack and his fiancée Lena were there, too. From the second I walked in, I could tell something was off. Jack wouldn't even look at me. He was completely cold. Dinner was awkward and tense, and once it was over, our parents conveniently stepped outside into the backyard. Maybe they wanted us to talk it out, or maybe they just didn't want to be in the middle of it. Lena went upstairs to take a phone call, so it ended up being just me and Jack alone in the living room. Trying to ease the tension, I asked something neutral about how the wedding plans were going. That's all it took for him to snap. He immediately fired back, "Why do you care? You're not paying for any of it, so you don't get to have an opinion." I kept my voice calm and told him that I do care, he's my brother, and I want him to have a great wedding. I just can't afford to pay for it. But he wasn't hearing it. He cut me off and said, "It's not that you can't, it's that you won't." According to him, I make good money and I'm just being stubborn. He straight up called me selfish and accused me of letting down the whole family. That really pissed me off. I told him he has no idea what my finances actually look like. Yeah, I make a decent salary, but that doesn't mean I've got tens of thousands sitting around unused. I've got bills, loans, and long-term financial goals. He just scoffed and said, everyone has bills. You're not some special case. Basically, he was calling me a liar, saying I was just making excuses. I shot back that this wasn't about making excuses, it was just reality. I told him, this isn't about whether I want to help. I literally can't give you that kind of money without wrecking myself financially. Then he launched into this emotional rant about how families are supposed to be there for each other, and how I was failing him. He said, even Hannah and our youngest brother are contributing something, and they earn way less than you do. You're the only one refusing to help. I explained again that our sister and brother gave what they realistically could, a small token amount. It's not like they're dropping thousands either. They're doing what they can afford. Expecting me to hand over several grand is a completely different level. But he wasn't backing down. He said I clearly didn't care about him, and then he hit me with, if you ever need help in the future, don't expect me or anyone else to show up for you. That hurt. He was practically yelling at this point. Hearing him say he was ashamed of me was like a punch in the gut. We've never fought like this before, so it felt surreal. Then he dropped a bomb. I should have expected to help pay for his wedding, because I know he doesn't have much money. That blew my mind. Who builds their budget around paying for someone else's wedding? I told him, Jack, that's not how life works. No one plans their finances around their sibling's wedding. That's just not a thing. Around that time, Lena came back downstairs. She clearly knew something was going down. She gently said something like, hey, maybe you guys should take a breath, trying to cool things off. I was ready to let it go. But Jack wasn't. He looked at her and said, stay out of it. This is between me and my brother. So she backed off and left the room. Then came the final blow. Jack looked me in the eye and said, if you're not going to be there for me now, then I don't want you at the wedding at all. He kicked me out of the wedding, just like that. I was stunned for a second, but I didn't beg or argue. I just said, if that's how you feel, fine. Have the wedding without me, and I grabbed my keys and left. My hands were shaking on the drive home. I was so angry and just completely emotionally drained. Later that night, I got a bunch of texts from my mom and dad. Same old message, how disappointed they were in me, how I'm hurting the family. I haven't responded yet. I needed a little space to cool off and think. Right now, it feels like I'm only welcome at the wedding if I write a check, and that's a terrible feeling. I'm not giving in to emotional blackmail, though. I'm still holding firm, I'm not paying. Hopefully, with time, Jack and my parents will come to their senses and realize how over the top this whole thing is. I guess we'll see. It all came to a head at my cousin's birthday party. I went there honestly just hoping to relax, have some cake, celebrate, and not deal with any more wedding drama. But clearly, my parents had other ideas. What ended up happening felt like a public ambush designed to shame me. The party was at my aunt's place. Pretty casual. But as soon as my mom saw me, she made a beeline over and immediately started in with a loud voice, too, so people nearby could hear. She said something like, we need to talk about how you're refusing to help with Jack's wedding. I tried to stop it right there. I leaned in and quietly said, Mom, please, not here. Let's talk later. But she wasn't interested in keeping things private. Instead, she got louder and announced to everyone within earshot, can you believe he's the only sibling who won't give a single dime toward his brother's wedding? Everyone else is doing their part. I felt the heat rise to my face. My hands were shaking. Conversations around the room stopped. Everyone was now tuned in to my personal family argument unfolding in real time. My aunt, the one hosting, was nearby and gently tried to ease the situation by saying something like, I'm sure he has his reasons. But my mom just brushed her off and kept going. Then my dad jumped in, saying, we're just asking for a little support for a family celebration. Is that too much to ask? Standing there, being shamed in front of cousins, aunts, uncles, basically half our extended family, was beyond uncomfortable. Eventually, I managed to find my voice. I spoke up loud enough for people to hear and said, I'm not contributing because I have my own debts and financial priorities. I don't think it's my job to fund Jack's wedding. I kept my tone even, but yeah, I was upset and embarrassed. Then my dad, clearly frustrated, blurted out, we only asked him for $5,000. That's it. His sister and brother already agreed to give $200 each. We're covering a lot, too. He makes good money. Why can't he just do this one thing for Jack? And just like that, the number was out there, $5,000. Everyone finally knew exactly what they were expecting from me. I saw a few relatives exchange surprised looks. I think even my aunt was shocked at the difference between what they were asking from me and what they'd accepted from my siblings. Honestly, in a weird way, it felt kind of validating to have that detail out in the open. I turned to my dad and said, $5000 is not a small favor. I don't have that kind of cash just sitting around, and I'm not going into debt for someone else's wedding. If you guys want to foot the bill, that's your call. But I'm not doing it. At this point, I was clearly emotional, and I wasn't hiding it anymore. My mom started crying and said, I can't believe how selfish you're being. We're family. We all make sacrifices. She told me I was breaking her heart and that she never imagined I'd turn my back on Jack like this. She walked away in tears. My dad shook his head and muttered something about how disappointed he was in the person I'd become, then followed her out. There I was, standing in the middle of a birthday party, completely humiliated, surrounded by silent stares. The one silver lining was that, now that everything had exploded in public, some relatives actually came up afterward and quietly offered support. My sister Hannah was there. She squeezed my arm and whispered, I'm sorry you had to deal with that. And for what it's worth, I don't think you're in the wrong. My youngest brother came over and quietly said he was on my side too, though he didn't want to challenge our parents in that moment. Even my aunt, the host, later told me that she'd spoken to my parents afterward and let them know what they did was inappropriate. She reminded them that weddings are a luxury, not a necessity, and said it wasn't right to put me on blast like that or demand so much. I ended up leaving the party early. I was emotionally drained and honestly just wanted to crawl into bed. Later, I texted my cousin and apologized for the scene. She was really kind and said I had nothing to be sorry for, but I still felt terrible that her birthday celebration got overshadowed by our family drama. After that, any tiny bit of doubt I had about holding my ground completely disappeared. That public shaming attempt made it crystal clear how far my parents were willing to go. I sent them both a message saying I was disappointed in the way they handled things and that I wasn't going to talk about it anymore. I repeated again that I wouldn't be paying for the wedding, and trying to guilt-trip me only made me dig in deeper. At that point, I decided I'd have one final face-to-face talk with them just to close this out for good. I wanted to be firm, clear, and final. Final update. A few days after the birthday party disaster, I went over to my parents' house to have that last conversation. The second I stepped into their living room, I could feel the tension. But I was ready. I sat down with them and calmly said, I'm not contributing anything toward Jack's wedding. Not now, not later, not the day of, not at all. I told them again that I love my brother and I truly wish him the best, but this isn't something I can or will take on financially. Then I brought up what happened at the party. I told them straight out it was wrong to confront me like that in front of the whole family. It didn't solve anything. It just humiliated me and made everything worse. The conversation went in circles for a while. My mom was crying again. My dad looked furious. I said, you're the ones who made this about money. You're the ones treating me like the villain for not handing over cash. And then I finally said the line I'd been holding in this whole time, if you want to fund Jack's expensive wedding, that's your decision. But I'm not putting myself into debt for someone else's party. That's final. That line really hit a nerve. My dad hated that I called it a party. But that's exactly what it is. A celebration. Not a crisis. Not an obligation. They kept trying to pull me back in emotionally, but I didn't budge. My dad even warned me, fine, but if you ever need help from us, don't expect it. My mom, through tears, said, I guess we know now which one of our kids really cares. Yeah, those words hurt. But I stayed steady. I told them, I'd made my decision. You don't have to like it, but I'm done discussing it. And I left. Honestly, I walked out of there feeling both heartbroken and relieved. I'd finally said what needed to be said. The next day, my sister Hannah stopped by to check in. We talked for a long time. She told me she was sorry our parents and Jack were being so stubborn and that she was proud of me for standing up for myself. That really meant a lot. I told her I'd been struggling emotionally through all of this. She gets it. She's upset with them too, but trying not to get caught in the crossfire. Hearing her say, I'm proud of you, reminded me that not everyone in the family sees me as the bad guy here. That was about a week ago. Since then, my parents haven't really talked to me. We've only exchanged a few basic texts when absolutely necessary. Jack and Lena haven't said a word to me either. I'm guessing at this point I'm officially off the wedding guest list if I wasn't already. Hannah's trying to stay neutral in front of them to avoid more drama, but privately she continues to tell me I did the right thing. My youngest brother actually stood up to our dad recently and called them out for being unreasonable. He called me afterward, pretty fired up, and said he couldn't believe how out of line they were. It felt good to hear that someone else in the family was not only on my side, but willing to speak up about it. I told him I appreciated it, but I didn't want him getting dragged into this on my account. He's frustrated, too, though, and I get the sense this has damaged his relationship with our parents as well. So yeah, right now I'm getting the silent treatment from my parents and Jack. And as much as I wish things were different, I can't lie and say I'm surprised. This whole thing has been exhausting and painful. I'm not someone who likes conflict, especially not with my own family, so this has taken a toll. But weirdly, I also feel lighter. I've stopped trying to negotiate. I've drawn a line and stuck to it. I'm refocusing on my own life again, my work, my friends, and the parts of my family that still have my back. I've been putting extra money toward my student loans, money I would have had to hand over for a wedding I wasn't even sure I'd be invited to. Watching the debt shrink is actually a great feeling. I still stand by everything I've done here. I don't believe I've done anything wrong, so I'm not apologizing. But I do hate that it's created this giant rift in the family. Maybe, eventually, things will cool off and we'll reconnect. I'm open to that, truly, but I won't bend over backwards to fix something I didn't break. I'm not sure what the next holiday season will look like, or if I'll even be invited. But I'll figure that out when the time comes. To everyone who followed this whole saga and shared advice, encouragement, and support, thank you. I never imagined my post would get this much attention, but I really appreciate every message. It helped more than you know. This all turned out to be way more dramatic than I ever expected when I simply asked if I was wrong for saying no. But in the end, I know one thing for sure, standing up for myself was the only thing I could do. It's sad that it came to this, but at least now, I can breathe again. Day by day, I'm just moving forward and hoping, eventually, the rest of my family does too.